Mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the AVPN webinar on social investing in India. My name is Stacy and in charge of membership services at Asian Venture Philanthropy Network. We have two AVPN members presenting today. Devanshu Dutta is a member of Ennovent Circle, an impact investing circle based in India. He will be presenting first on his experience as a homegrown impact investor and the gaps in the market provided for by the government that could be addressed by social investors. Next, Audrey Cillian of Artha Capital and Artha Initiative will be speaking on what they have been doing to help build the ecosystem in India. She will also highlight some tips and what to look out for as a foreign investor. I would also like to welcome our members to the session, and for others, a short introduction about AVPN. We are a membership-based organization headquartered in Singapore, working to promote venture philanthropy principles and methodologies in Asia. If you would like to engage with us, please find out more at our website at www.avpn.asia or contact me at stacy@avpn.asia. Now, before we proceed, a few housekeeping instructions. We will not take any questions during the presentations, which will last about 15 minutes each, as we will conduct the Q&A after both presentations. During the webinar, please use the console to type in your questions, and I will collate them and raise the questions to the presenters at the end of their presentations. It would help if you can specify if the question is intended for a specific speaker. If you have further questions that are not answered by the end of the webinar, you can email us. The webinar recording along with the presentation will be posted on our website within the week. Without further ado, I will now hand over the presentation to Devanshu.
Thank you, Stacy. Good afternoon all. I'll do my bit in terms of setting the context. As Stacy's just mentioned, I'm an impact investor and we've been working with the Ennovent Circle. I'll talk a little bit about that as well. Briefly, an introduction about me. I have been working in the consumer products and retail space for the last 20-odd years, and my firm Third Eyesight is a management consulting firm which focuses on sectors and industries which are related to consumer products and retail, which includes also upstream, including food and agri, textiles, and so on. I have another firm called PVC Partners, where with my partner we are essentially focused on early stage, preferably first generation, first time entrepreneurs, and supporting their efforts through various means, including investment. I'm a member of the Ennovent Circle, and I'll talk briefly about Ennovent and the Ennovent Circle on the next slide. And I'm also an advisory board member to various education institutions in India and outside, and companies as well. So very, very quick introduction to Ennovent. Given the length of presentation and all the stuff that we have to go through, I'll keep it very brief. Ennovent essentially covers the whole spectrum from discovering impact enterprises, social enterprises, to actually helping to set up, start up, finance, and scale those enterprises. There's a variety of services which Ennovent is involved with. One of the things that I and my partner Rohit have been involved with as far as Ennovent is concerned is the impact, the Ennovent Circle. It used to be called the Ennovent Impact Circle, which essentially is a group of 20 plus, about 25 people, professionals in with different backgrounds, who are mentors, who are investors, with a variety of experiences, who are available to the startups that Ennovent is evaluating or supporting, and are involved with those startups in a variety of ways. Ennovent has also been involved with startup challenges, vetting, identifying and vetting startup enterprises which deserve more attention and perhaps funding in a variety of ways. So what I thought I'll do is maybe start with a very basic fundamental definition of what social enterprise is, because personally, I think for the past few years that we have been involved with social enterprises or impact investments, the variety of definitions actually has concerned me quite a bit, and the fuzziness of definitions is actually something which bothers me quite a bit, because there are impacts, there are social impacts being made by purely for-profit enterprises, which you wouldn't call a social enterprise. And at the same time, there are social enterprises, or if I might call them semi-social enterprises, which don't deserve to be placed on a pedestal as a social enterprise, but do get talked about in that manner. At the same time, there are truly deserving social enterprises which are actually lost. The spotlight is not on them because they don't have the profile, they don't have the means to actually get the attention that they deserve. So, and also I think the space, not only in India but worldwide, is still developing. There is a move towards investment in social enterprises as opposed to pure philanthropy, just move away from pure grant-based, no questions asked funding. So I think it's important for us to have that context very clear in our mind. So this is my, I chose a definition which resonated with me, which was the Social Enterprise Alliance's definition, that a social enterprise is any organization which harnesses the power of the marketplace to solve critical social and environmental problems. And to me, the key actually lies in critical social or environmental problems. So it's not about things which would be part of the normal market and distribution. It is something which goes to fundamental needs. And therefore, for my own understanding and for, let's say, for my own focus, I like to define it as those areas where there's a government gap. Wherever there's a government gap, typically are areas where there's a fundamental human need which should be addressed by government, but is not being addressed by government. And that can be then addressed by a private enterprise which is geared towards the well-being of that community, but operates in a market-led way. So I think that that emphasis or that focus for me personally is important. And I fully accept that there may be other views, and even within, let's say, the Ennovent circle, there are different views. So fully accept that, but I just thought I'd put my definition out there to provide the context. So from that point of view, if I look at India, there are 8 very critical areas where unfortunately we have gaps in government. Some of them are being plugged, over a period of time. They've got better and they are getting better, but these gaps still remain. And these are fundamental needs. I mean, if we look at healthcare or education or, availability of power, environment, having a pollution-free, healthy environment, or clean water, transportation. So all of these things I think are needed for a community's well-being, a nation's well-being, an average person to feel secure, and safe, to be able to go about their daily business and flourish. I think all of these things are fundamental needs. And unfortunately, with these gaps, what has been happening over the past few years is there are market gaps which companies are looking at addressing. But if I were to take the example of healthcare or education, there are companies, private companies, which have invested in setting up hospital chains, clinics, or chains of schools. Unfortunately, most of them are geared to or tailored to the uppermost crust of the Indian population. Their pricing, their infrastructure, their outreach, the capacity, I think, is geared towards a very small part of India's population, whereas the need, the burning need, actually lies in those places where most of these private companies will not want to go or address. So I think that's the gap that we have for enterprises to come forward and structure themselves in a way where they can deal with the less privileged and yet make a viable business out of it. So there are, I think, let me take an example. I mean, transportation infrastructure sounds like a big thing. You know, if you look at railways or if you look at highways, there is clearly a gap from the length of good quality road network or railway network that we need. Private enterprises, social enterprises cannot address all of that. Surely the government needs to do that. But I would just take one example. There is a foundation which is working on sanitation in the railways. Now, it is actually the job of the railways to maintain sanitation on their trains and at the platforms. Clearly, they were falling short of the mark. Somebody said, why can't we have, you know, worldwide there are railways running with clean toilets, and there are a variety of means which are available. Technology is not the barrier. So what we need to plug is not really to create new technology, but to create the awareness and to create the acceptance of alternative technologies from what is being used right now, to make sure that people are aware that there are other ways to manage the whole sanitation process along the railways. So that foundation came up, and they're doing some work. They're still very early in their life cycle. So it's not, it's not to tackle the entire problem. There are even small problems within the entire problem which could be tackled by social enterprises in very innovative and very meaningful ways. When we look at accountability, legal accountability or transparency, I think certainly that it's the government's job to be transparent and to create accountability within the government and across the board with companies and all that. And there's a lot of regulatory and infrastructure work which is happening towards e-governance, etc., and the right to information and so on. But equally, that doesn't mean that everything is all right, and therefore there are those gaps which can be plugged by individual micro, whether it's an NGO or whether it's a social enterprise, to create to create those bridges, to plug those gaps. So I think with that in mind, I also thought that I will go through a little bit of the facts and figures which might help to set the context for us. And I found this very amusing but extremely accurate quote of Mark Twain, which says that you need to get your facts first and then you can distort them as you please. So, given that there are so many definitions of what social enterprises are, and given that there's also a lot of interest in the area, there's a lot of press we've seen at different points of time when there are conferences and events that happen, or there are prize, award ceremonies and so on. There is a highlight which comes forth, which suggests that there is a lot of action happening in this space. And I thought I'll just use the facts and figures to actually get our context right on that. So clearly, when we look at impact investments in India, and this is from the World Bank IntelliCap data source, you can see the growth over the last 13, 14 years. There is a significant growth in the number of impact investments being made in India. And very interestingly, it's really accelerated in the last 4 or 5 years. And more than that, I think there is a growing attention towards more than just microfinance. I mean, microfinance was very big. There were a lot of deals, a lot of funding came in the 2005, 2006, 2007 period, 2008 as well. And thereafter, obviously, partly the financial crisis across the world was responsible, but I think some of the practices that were being followed, the not so healthy practices, the shakeout in the industry, all of that also served to force people to look at other areas, not just MFI. And the good news is that there is a little bit of a diversification, actually a significant amount of diversification which has happened in investments and interest in the other areas which are outside financial inclusion. It's outside the MFI area. There is also a geographical diversification in terms of, from the hotspots that used to be there earlier. It's gone beyond the urban centers. It has gone into smaller markets. But curiously also from the other side, if you look at it, a lot of the grant-based work used to be focused on villages. And in the recent years, there's, and especially with, let's say, a market-led approach coming in with social enterprises, the focus is back on urban markets. And there's a good reason for that. We have a lot of poor people in India's cities. We don't have a clearly segregated population. They are underserved in many ways as well. And that population is very concentrated. So for a startup to have a reasonable number of people to serve, to have a critical mass, to be able to build a strong foundation, India's cities offer a very, very good base for social enterprises to begin. And I think that diversification from, not just the big cities, but also the smaller cities, and not just the rural markets, but also the urban markets, I think that's a very interesting mix which has also started emerging in the recent years. And I think that's extremely healthy for the entire space, because I think overall you will have many more examples of types of enterprises, types of areas, and potentially many more successes, because there would be critical mass which would be more easily available. The cost of servicing these markets would be more meaningful, and in terms of the overall funding, it would be flowing through to the impact area rather than just on travel and infrastructure and management. There are challenges, I think, through the life cycle. There are very specific India challenges and there are sector challenges. So if I look at it from the point of view of the Indian environment, India is a challenging environment to do business in for anyone, even if you're not running an impact investment or a social enterprise. If you're running a regular business, the number of regulations, the kind of regulations, the variety of other issues, infrastructural and other issues, create lots of points of friction for any business. And especially if you're a small business, the points of friction become even worse, from the compliance point of view, from just the operating framework point of view. Given that social enterprises, which are trying to address an area which is challenging by itself. So if assume that you are a social enterprise and you're dealing with low-income families which are dispersed, and the needs are very fundamental, the capacity to pay is rather low, and you're dealing with all the other challenges which are the environment challenges, the operating environment challenges. That's that creates a uniquely difficult mix for enterprises in the social impact space. From an investor's perspective, I think there are challenges through the life cycle. How do you discover, identify those organizations? How do you select? How do you vet them? What are the criteria that you apply, given that the space itself is evolving rapidly? There is money available, there's the intent available, but how do you make that match between the two and make sure that you put in place a structure, an entity which addresses everybody's need, the market's need, the social enterprises need, and the investors' need? How do you support that enterprise through its growth life cycle? How do you monitor it? That whatever the intent was, it's being followed through on. I think when you're a private enterprise and you seek external funding as an entrepreneur, you have to reconcile to the fact that you're answerable to somebody from outside. However, if you're a private enterprise and you're not in the impact space, you can pivot your business with changing environment and the changing market, and you can still fulfill the promises that you're making to the investor. In a social enterprise, the investor has a very clear alignment with the original articulation of your vision that you had said, what area you want to impact, how you want to impact it. And I'm not saying that impact investors are inflexible, but it becomes a little bit more challenging to then flex the business and flex the enterprise. So that is a challenge on the enterprise part, but it's also a challenge for the investor to be able to flex themselves and to be able to fit that flexibility within their mandate that they have for their fund or their foundation. One of the biggest challenges, I think, is the exit. We haven't seen a lot of exits, and fundamentally, I think there are issues with exit in the social enterprise space. You can't just massively scale up a company and then go IPO or get bought over by a strategic investor as easily as you might, let's say, in the regular day-to-day business. And that creates a challenge. How do you provide the return in a meaningful time? And we've heard terms like patient capital, and I think that is a very necessary part of social enterprises and impact investment. The patience that we have to show in this space is far more. The ability to look for the long-term return is far more. The need for the ability to look towards the long term is far more in this space than perhaps in any other space. Just for a comparison, I thought I'll do a very quick comparison on what's happened. So, just taking the numbers, and these are rounded off, they're just order of magnitude numbers, not precise numbers. The estimated organizations which are non-financial inclusion organizations in the impact investment space that have got funded are about 200. The market that they're trying to address is 800 million plus. The figures of 835, 840 million, I've just taken a round figure of 800 million. The committed amounts or the invested amounts are about 400 million. There's a figure which is about 1.6 billion, but a lot of that is going towards the MFIs and financial inclusion space. So when you net all of that out, it's about 400 million, which means that investment, if you kind of just divide it by that denominator of the target market, it's about 50 cents per person in that addressable market. And it's about 2 million of investment per organization. Now, if you take those figures, I think obviously, they're far bigger than they were even 3 years ago. There's a lot of action which has happened in the last 3-4 years. But if you put that in context with another sector in India, e-commerce, you just look at the numbers there. About 100 organizations have got invested, maybe about 150. The addressable market for them really is only about 7 to 10 million people at the moment. And the investments committed are about 5 billion. And this is because all of those companies are building for the future. A lot of companies have gone out of business already in the last 3-4 years. And the investment which is coming into the space now is chasing fewer and fewer companies. And if you look at that investment per target individual, that 500 average is actually far higher for the companies that are at the top of the heap, whether it's a Flipkart or a Snapdeal or an Amazon or any of these companies. And the investment per organization, if you average it out, is 50 million. So there's a huge scale of a difference between the two spaces when you look at the addressable market, what you're trying to achieve, which essentially suggests that there is a humongous opportunity waiting, which is not being addressed at the moment, but it's being choked due to some reason or the other. I would say partially it is due to capacity enablement. Sure, e-commerce is a far more exciting space for many investors worldwide and certainly in India, but there are other reasons. And I think one of the addressable reasons is capacity. And there are two kinds of capacity that I'd like to quickly talk about. One is the entrepreneurial capacity, just the sheer number of companies that are being funded. I think we need to massively expand the funnel, the intake funnel for identifying companies, for identifying entrepreneurs, to help them to actually become entrepreneurs. There are plenty of people with lots of good ideas who are running organizations which are not enterprises. They are working in the social space, but they don't really maybe have the capability to create an organization which can scale up. So there are plenty of issues which need to be addressed there, where I think if we can address that mouth of the funnel issue, where if we can increase the capacity at the front, that will enable many more companies to come to a stage where they become fundable. And we need to also then look at, can we actually expand the investor capacity? Can we actually look at infrastructure? Can we look at platforms? There are a few platforms, but I think there needs to be much more done to bring more investors together to look at commitments, multiple commitments perhaps into one enterprise, to be able to look at how we can actually make the space more high profile, which attracts more money. Establish metrics and tools which can actually, from taking the identification all the way to support and scaling, have metrics and tools which can enable organizations and investors to actually use with their investee organizations to help them scale and become visible. Collaboration is a very important part of that as well. I think plenty of people are still in the discovery mode. They're trying to figure out what's happening and how they can do things. And I think this space itself is fundamentally more collaborative than many other spaces. So knowledge sharing, on the regulatory side, making the government aware, making authorities in different forms aware of what can be done and what the impact could be, is very, very important as well. I'm not going to spend too much time on policy and legal frameworks. I'll very quickly mention that the whole policy framework and the legal framework is evolving. Compliances today under the new Companies Act are far more rigorous for small organizations than they were in the previous Companies Act, and that also means, while that means it's it's more transparent, it also means that it adds cost to the whole management of the organization and the people involved, and the number of interactions that you need to have with different authorities goes up significantly. Having said that, the policy is also fluid. There are several clauses which are still being debated, and so a good suggestion would be to have a good company secretary, chartered accountant, and lawyer whenever you're doing a transaction for a set of advice. Excuse me. For a good set of advice from different aspects. So I think, just in summation, I think if I were to look at what defines a healthy nation, what defines quality of life, India has a long way to go. I mean, if we were to look at where we are with the people who are worst off in the country, we have a long, long way to go in evolving as a nation. And I think a nation is only as successful as its least successful citizen would be. So my focus would be, how can we actually make the floor higher? How can we actually raise the minimum acceptable standard in India? And I think those are the areas where social enterprises can actually impact. And one metric which we were discussing last week, my partner Rohit and I, can we actually look at reducing the target market by half every 5 years? If we can do that, then I think we could legitimately say that we are successful in achieving our goals. Thank you, and just some additional thoughts on a presentation which you can go through later after this webinar is over. Thank you so much. Over to you, Stacey.
Thank you very much, Devanshu, for that very insightful overview. Right now, I will be turning this over to Audrey. And everyone, I just want to highlight again that for any questions, please key them into the console, and I will be collating them so that after Audrey's presentation, I will be able to present these questions to both Audrey and to Devanshu. Okay, so Audrey, can I hand it over to you now?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Stacey, and thank you to Devanshu. He's done a wonderful job with dealing with definitions and setting a fantastic context with a lot of detail and very thought-provoking numbers. For my part,
yeah, Audrey, just to say, could you expand up your presentation to full screen? Thanks.
Yes, of course. Sorry. I hope it's visible.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. For my part, my plan is just to sort of get into some of the intricacies and sort of the perspective of an investor that sits outside of India. I thought I would just begin with a little bit, a very short slide on our ecosystem building activities and efforts in India. We, as some of you may have been familiar already, run a platform called the Artha platform, and this comes out of the context in which we've been working now for about 8-9 years. Rianta Capital is an investment advisory to a family trust, and the Singh family, having founded a large, very successful retail business in the UK called New Look, decided about 8-9 years ago when I met them that they would start building a portfolio, and we began by trying to identify and unearth investable opportunities, and the goal was very much to focus on social entrepreneurs.
Sorry, Audrey, just to say again, apparently your slide is kind of like slanted to one side, so we can't see the right side. Not sure how that's happening.
Is this better? I hope this is better. Hopefully.
It actually still looks the same. In that case, maybe you don't share the full screen, yeah. Because we're not able to see the bottom and on the right.
It's funny. I'm on the slideshow mode. I don't know what else to do.
Why don't you just get out of that, back to how you were previously. At least with that, we were able to see.
Okay.
Yeah. Are you able to move your slide sort of, I don't know how to say this, to the left?
To the left.
Yeah. Because right now it's...
It's so strange.
Okay, could you zoom it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Zoom to
If I
100%. Right now it's at 100% already. Okay.
Is this better?
I think we can see it. We can see it. We'll just go along like that. Yeah.
Yeah? This is okay?
Yeah. At least we can read everything, although it seems a bit funny. Yeah. Sorry, please continue.
Strange. Okay, sorry. It's very strange. Apologies for that. I was just laying the context, a couple of years into our effort as a sort of a new impact investor on the scene. We weren't even really using the language of impact investing per se. We understood quickly that there was a difficulty in not only originating, but certainly in the efforts that we were expending to conduct due diligence. And these efforts were often repeating efforts that we saw undertaken by many of our peers. And so in some ways, part of what we call ecosystem building is just an attempt to create some free tools for those who are peer donors and peer investors with whom we could presumably collaborate. And so the platform has been up and running for a couple of years. We've been also now committed to a 5-year funding of a venture challenge called the Artha Venture Challenge, where we are looking to, through the context of a competition, and this may evolve over time, but through the context of a competition, we offer match equity funding to peer investors. We've last year matched on grant, debt, and equity. We'll try to do the same for this year and on for 3 years. And effectively, we pick a bunch of finalists. Last year it was 15. This year it's 11. And we offer them capacity support for 7 or 8 months, and then aim to match a lead investor that comes from within the active impact investing network. And Artha Networks is simply a vehicle that now allows our architecture for the platform to be licensed elsewhere. So these are our activities as we've undertaken them to try to support just essentially more collaboration and more syndication as we look at these opportunities, given the scope of what it is they're aiming and they choose to tackle as a challenge. I thought I would just lay out a few effectively some thoughts on what to consider when you are a helicopter investor. And I know this term is loaded, and I also am aware that it is certainly not the optimal configuration for those who seek to deploy capital. It is, of course, much better and preferable to be, at least with a full team in the country in which you are deploying funds. But we found that there are a number of challenges across and within the community in which we work. First, I think it just comes with admitting. It's like AA. It's like admitting that you are a helicopter investor. I think that one has to kind of really absorb the fact that in order to bridge that distance, one has to really go that extra mile, and that being able to build strong relationships that lead to the kind of collaboration that we want really takes a lot of time and resource. We have the good fortune of having amazing partners with whom we collaborate around our various initiatives, and these have developed over the past, well, if not the last 8-9 years, but certainly the last 4 or 5 years. Of course, there is the truism, and this is nothing new for those who have been in the practice, but the transaction costs for diligence for those of us who are removed geographically from our pipelines are extremely high. And the smaller the deal, the higher the relative costs, and certainly the challenge being that our goal is really to try to fill the gap of the smaller deals that have more difficulty in raising the 30, 40, 50, certainly $100,000 that they're looking to raise to take their operations just perhaps beyond a first pilot into the next level. And Devanshu's already touched on almost all of these in some way or another, the regulatory issues. I do think that until one is involved in their first transaction, the actual process and terminology, and certainly being the ability to keep up with the changing regulatory environment, all present serious challenges. So we have found that having a strong, dependable legal counsel is absolutely vital to being able to proceed with any kind of reasonable pace. Speaking of pace, the time frames around structuring these deals and negotiating terms certainly does not happen in a fluid manner. And in some ways, I think this is one of the core tasks and challenges of all of us who gather today on this webinar to think about. The idea that everybody comes into this process with their own expectations, criteria, parameters. These are reflected in method, and as soon as you have a competing method within one transaction, we quickly realize that we're in for quite a long time frame to try to reconcile and establish common terms. So there's sort of all of these observations, quasi-facts, some of them observations, and then sort of rounding out with the idea that it's hard to be flexible, admittedly, when one is acting on behalf of a larger institution, a family office, or a fund. Clearly, we have sort of conditions and controls and processes to which we must adhere. So this is kind of the tension that many of us are operating within or dealing with when we're trying to deploy. And I thought it would be worth mentioning these major points. The challenges, I think, that again Devanshu's already touched on, is relates to now the sheer scope of the buzz around our sector. The greatest challenges seem to be comprised of finding effective ways to sort through the many opportunities that we see. There's this funny sort of tipping point, and I'm not sure exactly what it is that drives the difference between a really committed, strong but early stage social enterprise is around on the block for a certain amount of time, sort of pitching the offering that they have to the market in terms of a product or a service. And I don't know if others have noticed this, but it seems like everybody sort of sits and waits and is waiting for another person to lead. And as soon as another person begins to show interest, everybody else tries to jump on and get involved. It's this funny sort of tipping point. So it's partly cutting through the noise. It's also partly being, I guess, targeted and focused enough to know when to begin work, sort of in the absence of buzz, and being able to sort of work independently. There is sort of this concentration, and it was reflected by the numbers in the IntelliCap report from last year, where I think 80 or 85% of investment in impact deals in India were concentrated into about 15 enterprises. And again, this cuts back to the same question. Are we able to diversify our activity as a collective? And can we retain our commitments to take the risks that we say we're taking in labeling ourselves as impact investors? Another challenge, I think, is this idea of really, I guess, being realistic about the impact that we are achieving. To move the needle in any given sector, in any given geography, I think it requires the cross-sector collaboration of dozens and dozens of us. For us to say that we've invested in 3 energy businesses in India, and to think that this actually moves the needle when it comes to energy access for the BOP is I think it's a stretch. And so I think as we look at a particular bucket or vertical, let's say it's education, let's say it's health, if we would be able to coordinate our activities and look at an entire pipeline of wonderful health opportunities, and to think about potentially even geographically concentrating our efforts as a community for certain periods of time, I think that would be more akin to moving the needle and saying that we are actually making a big difference. Using the existing networks to identify good collaborators on transactions and so on is a very good idea. There are several networks. I mean, obviously the AVPN being a premier network, Ennovent, and then the various sort of clusters of angel networks and so on. All of these are so valuable. Their presence is, I think, a testament to I guess, the enrichment that one can have once one enters this arena. So I think in some ways guiding newcomers into these core nodes is vital, and it doesn't happen enough. I think it still takes many of us quite a bit of time to figure out who to connect with and how to work. Over the years, I'll just say a couple of words on some of the thinking, the conclusions that we've come to about our preferred approach to the terms of investments that we look at. By virtue of the regulatory environment, we are somewhat limited in the instruments that we can adopt to deploy capital. This means that going with sort of a straight debt offering tends not to work. We tend to opt for the compulsorily convertible cumulative pref shares approach, the CCCPs, or the debentures approach with coupons associated with these, which need to be positioned appropriately. And we do this because taking straight equity in many of these companies that are early stage just doesn't tend to always make sense. Because as soon as you enter that equity discussion early on, you are by definition having to have full-on valuation conversations. So the convertible approach tends to work better, and also affords opportunities to the entrepreneur to be rewarded for performance on the basis of the transaction. We often tend to we look at longer time frames, as Devanshu mentioned. It's patient capital, so 7 to 10 year time frames on exits, and we do tend to prefer or opt for deferring dividends or any coupon payments or anything like that until the companies are in strong cash positions to support them. I think it's sort of a delicate point to understand at what time one can sort of put on the squeeze and ask and put on a bit more pressure for a company to sort of share some of its cash flow in the form of dividends. So oftentimes we find it doesn't make sense to push on this point. We definitely tranche all our investments, so they often come in two if not three slices, where we're tying the injections of capital to the achievement of milestones based on agreed upon operational plans. We are sort of systematically open to co-investment and have and continue to try to leave rounds open on the basis of the work we've done, thinking and hoping that it might make it easier for somebody else to step in as well in a common round. In this regard, I think this is one of the features that differentiates the impact activity of our family office from the commercial activity. These types of practices would not be common in any other kind of portfolio. We are also often happy to ratchet our valuations on the performance of the company, as sort of mentioned just a moment ago. We typically look at ratcheting on at least EBITDA and perhaps also on a turnover target. So if a company achieves a certain amount of turnover and a certain amount of EBITDA, we'll give them a better sort of an optimal situation in terms of the valuation at the point of our conversion of preference shares. So happy to answer any questions on that in a moment. I'm not going to go in with, I'm not going to read this whole slide, but for Artha Venture Challenge co-investors, I did throw together some of another sample of our thinking on what it is we tend to want to look for when we are deploying our equity portion of an investment. And we typically prefer to have, for example, observer rights, but if we're partnering with a lead, we certainly hope that the lead will represent on the board. So having at least one person representing the investor cohort is so vital on a board level. We often look for rights of first refusal on share issues and share transfers, and we also tend to hope that we get standard tag-along rights. So when we're involved in an investment, that all minority shareholders, including ourselves, be able to tag along in the event that the promoter or a majority shareholder decides to sell. In terms of drag-along rights, these are a bit more sensitive, but our preference is also that if a majority shareholder is sufficiently large enough that they be able to bring minority shareholders in as well if the decision is that it's time to sell a company. Across the board, we're supporting equal treatment, pari passu treatment for all the investors in a common round. So we hope that co-investors tend to feel happy with that, even if our invested amounts are not always exactly the same. And we hope for good levels of legal due diligence to be achieved, and that reporting be transparent and frequent on a quarterly basis, ideally. So these are just a couple of the parameters that we hope our AVC co-investors take into account. And this leaves us with just a couple of questions that I'll put out there as part of perhaps the discussion now following both of our presentations. I guess several of these questions for me come back down to time frames and how do we get these transactions moving faster. I can say, and if any of our co-investors are on the call listening, they will be smiling sort of wryly as they hear me say, we would like to be able to move faster, but we move very slowly. So I guess part of this relates to feedback. Can we accept feedback and constructive criticism from our peers when our processes are not optimal? How do we enable this, perhaps through the AVPN? What do we consider best practice? What are great examples of our best investments? And I have a couple of stories on that front, should the opportunity allow for elaboration. And then lastly, I think this is sort of could be perceived as a trite point, but I really do believe if we can set some standard to reduce the length of legal agreements, it will save the sanity of many of us in this community. So with that, I pass the baton back over to Stacy.
Thank
and
you.
welcome any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Audrey. So I have a couple of questions now already incoming. So the first question is for Devanshu, actually, with regards to doing due diligence on your investee organizations. I think what the person was really asking is, what are you looking for with these investee organizations? What are the important points during the life cycle of your impact investment?
So I think for social enterprises versus other enterprises, I think the due diligence, most of the points of due diligence are common, whether what has been promised is actually there, whether it's being delivered, and so on. So I don't think there's any specific difference in the process. The same legal, the secretarial compliances that need to be followed should be there. For me, I think the one factor which would be very, very high on the agenda would be purpose. The statement of purpose for the organization, whether that is being held true to or not, and whether the activities and the management is aligned to that or not, is something which is very critical to me. Other than that, I think we mentioned that the investments in this space are fairly small, which obviously creates an issue in terms of the amount of money and management effort which is going into compliances and managing the due diligence and so on. So my suggestion to anybody who's in this space is to use networks, use platforms, and the Ennovent Circle is one such, where there are multiple people. So you get the benefit of different kinds of capability, different orientation, and that helps you to actually perhaps speed up the process and reduce the cost of doing the due diligence, and even while you've invested, maybe even monitoring that.
Okay, thank you for that. And the next question is really about whether or not there are any particular sectors that impact investors are really interested in. For example, what about primary sectors such as agribusiness? So maybe Audrey, you can take that one first.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, agriculture, in our case, it is for all non-Artha Venture Challenge investments moving forward, our core goal is to deploy capital into specifically agriculture-oriented and agriculture-focused businesses. So from our perspective, absolutely, this is an interest. But I do know that there are a number of cohorts within, for example, CIIE, where they are focused on sort of identifying and grooming clusters of ag-focused businesses. There are several opportunities, I think, for those in that line of work. I would echo Devanshu's suggestion that using the networks that exist and sort of going that extra mile to reach out to an individual who leads a network or who appears, prominently on a website. Any of those, I think you'd find that people are quite receptive to sort of hearing you out and to trying to find ways to support the visibility of what your work is all about. Any other questions, Stacy?
Hello, sorry about that. Yeah, the next question really, I was asking, the next question is with regards to whether either of you have any opinion with regards to closed-ended versus open-ended funds in the impact space.
Shall I take a shot at it?
Sure.
Yeah, so I think one of the aspects that I mentioned about the need for patience, and I think if we look at the for-profit regular businesses, funds in those sectors also have problems in getting exits because the way the environment is in India, to be able to scale up a business and to get a credible exit where you can move out in favor of a strategic investor perhaps. IPO is a distant reality for most companies anyway, but getting that strategic investor interested and achieving that scale and getting that exit within a 7 to 10 year period, which is typically where any private equity or venture fund would be looking at exiting, is a challenge in for-profit regular businesses as well. In this case, in the impact investment space, it becomes perhaps even more difficult. And I think there is, while I'm not saying that I have that it should be mandated that we should have open-ended funds, I think we'll find it easier if funds have and investors have an open-ended approach rather than bracketing investments into funds which are necessarily going to be closed off at the end of 8 years or 10 years. I think if you have an open-ended approach, even if it is a capability to roll over investments from one fund into another, I think that would be much better because some of the enterprises, some of the areas that we are talking about, that tipping point for that enterprise, the hockey stick or whatever you want to call it, I think possibly may be further into the future than for a regular business. It may be that life cycle is going to be 6 years, 7 years before you really start to see the benefit of the impact flowing through to your enterprise in terms of valuation, in terms of revenues. And I think keeping that in mind, I would suggest it's perhaps best to keep an open-ended approach, maybe even look at alternative means of return rather than just exits, whether it is dividends or some such mechanism which plays out over a longer time frame.
If I may just add one point to that, Devanshu, I would also say just on the issue of exit, it's quite interesting to know. I mean, depending on if we're looking at those of us who are really on the early stage end of the spectrum in terms of investment strategy, we are often going to be looking to each other as the source of exit. I'm finding. And because the idea of, as you said earlier, a public listing or some other, sort of large buyout is unlikely with some of these types of businesses at this stage. And so the only real options are, third-party sale or the company buyback. And the company buyback is also pretty strictly delimited with caps around share capital of the business. So you often have to look at promoter buyback, which is delicate to say the least. And so, the third-party sale route is probably the most viable. So just to tack that onto what you just said. And often it's going to be from within the community that this sale happens.
Okay, thank you so much, Audrey, and thank you very much to Devanshu. I actually have to stop taking the questions. There's still a few more questions I know that are left unanswered, but because we've gone past 5 o'clock already, and I apologize for the overrun. So I want to thank everyone again for this very insightful session. We will post the webinar recording on our website by end of the week, so please look out for that. And any other questions that are unanswered, please send them to me. I will forward it on to both Devanshu and Audrey. We will hold another webinar on India in the later part of December. So please visit our website again to register for it. And thank you again for your engagement, and I look forward to our next session. So thank you, Audrey. Thank you, Devanshu.
Thank you, Stacey. Thank you, Audrey, and thank you all to the audience.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening. It was a pleasure.